After Kim Yo-hong successfully passes the 7 trials of the underworld and is reincarnated, his recently deceased younger brother, Soo-hong, is guided by the same 3 guardians, Hee-won-mek, Deok-chun, and Gang-rim, to begin his trial. Before they reach the court of King Yomura, the lord of the underworld, they must confront an army of sand demons determined to kill Soo-hong, as he carries the mark of a vengeful spirit due to his soul's desire for revenge against his killers. During the battle, King Yomura grants them passage, and they present themselves before him. He is enraged with Gang-rim, as bringing a vengeful spirit into the underworld is against the rules. Gang-rim contends that, according to the rules, a spirit, vengeful or not, can be granted a fair trial if their death was unjust. He asserts that Soo-hong's death was unjust, as he was buried alive after being accidentally shot in a cover-up, which led to his death. Ultimately, it's about the intention. Did his 2 friends know he was still alive when they buried him, or did they think he was already dead? Only a trial can uncover the truth. King Yomura agrees to grant Soo-hong a trial, but this trial will be different. Instead of undergoing all 7 trials, Soo-hong will only face the ones related to his death, which will determine whether his killers knew they were burying him alive. There are 2 trials connected to his death: injustice and violence. To begin the first trial, they must traverse 4 different hells. Gang-rim will guide Soo-hong on this journey, but they're not off the hook just yet. King Yomura has an additional task for them on the outskirts of a shantytown in South Korea. In a shantytown lives a poo old man named Yo-chun Sam with his grandson, Hyun-dong. Yo-chun Sam's death has been long overdue, but he worships a 1,000-year-old household god called Sonju. After hearing the man's prayers, Sonju decided to appear to him one day and help him. Now, Sonju lives with him, assisting with chores and even playing uncle to Hyun-dong. Whenever King Yomura sends guardians to collect Yo-chun Sam's soul, Sonju, being a troublemaker god, always prevents them and sends them running with their tails between their legs. Since Hee-won-mek is one of the most formidable and experienced guardians after Gang-rim, he is instructed to collect Yo-chun Sam's soul along with Deok-chun, and to kill Sonju by smashing the earthenware jar he always carries. This jar is an enshrinement containing his ashes, which he must preserve or else he will die. To make matters even worse, King Yomura sets a time limit of 49 days for these tasks. If within that time frame Gang-rim cannot pass Soo-hong through the 2 trials, and the other 2 cannot collect Yo-chun Sam's soul, they will be stripped of their titles as guardians and punished, and Soo-hong will be thrown into eternal damnation without a trial. Failing to locate the jar, Hee-won-mek and Deok-chun speed things up and attempt to collect Yo-chun Sam's soul. However, Sonju steps in and defeats both of them while Yo-chun Sam sleeps soundly. After all, he'll need a good night's sleep if he wants to live a healthy, long life. As the 2 guardians beg for forgiveness, Sonju is surprised they don't remember him. He tells them that he was their guardian into the underworld when they died 1,000 years ago. Sonju finds it very strange that King Yomura wiped the guardians' memories of their past lives, as this isn't standard procedure, and the king had never done it before. He mentions that King Yomura is actually a pretty cool guy. Sonju explains that the reason he's preventing the old man's death is that Yo-chun Sam is the only family little Hyun-dong has left. Since they are really poor, Yo-chun Sam couldn't afford to send Hyun-dong to school before, but the boy will be attending his first day in 40 days. Sonju wants the boy to have the memory of his grandpa taking him to school on his first day. So he says that after 40 days, they can have the old man. Until then, he'll kick their asses if they try. Meanwhile, Gang-rim harpoons a giant fish monster in the River of 3 Crossings and uses Soo-hong as bait to speed up their journey and get to the trials quicker. On Earth, Hee-won-mek and Deok-chun hide out and keep an eye on Sonju while waiting out the 40 days. They observe as a loan shark and his gang come looking to collect a long overdue payment from Yo-chun Sam. Sonju pleads with them, but they shove him out of the way and destroy Yo-chun Sam's home. Relieving himself of the title of guardian and becoming a household god means that Sonju cannot harm humans even if he tried. This is when Hee-won-mek steps in to bargain. He offers not only to uphold the 40-day restriction, but also to ensure that Yo-chun Sam's funeral and Hyun-dong are taken care of when Yo-chun Sam dies. In return, he wants Sonju to help Deok-chun recover all the lost memories of their past lives. Sonju reluctantly agrees. Their conversation is interrupted by the loan shark threatening to break Hyun-dong's leg as a lesson to his grandpa. But don't worry, Hee-won-mek steps in and shows them why that's not a very nice thing to say by breaking all of their legs in return for this kind gesture. Sonju keeps his promise by revealing Hee-won-mek's past life. It turns out Hee-won was even more of a badass back in the day. 1,000 years ago during the Goryeo dynasty, Hee-won-mek was one of the greatest military generals, known as White Wildcat for the white fur scarf he always wore in battle. He slaughtered many Jurchen invaders at the northern border by the dozens while keeping his white fur scarf spotless, because even their blood was afraid to get on the Wildcat. That night, the Guardians convince Sonju that the best place for Hyun-dong is an orphanage. The next day, they schedule a meeting with the director, who tells them she needs a document from his guardian proving they can no longer take care of him. Outside, Deok-chun plays with a group of orphan kids. and Sunju notes how she hasn't changed in 1,000 years. In her past life, Deokjun was an 18-year-old Jurchen girl who lived in a small village. When they were attacked by Goryeo invaders, she fled with all the young children to the mountains and took care of them. When they returned to Yeochun Sam, he refuses to send Hyundong to the orphanage, believing that would mean he failed as a grandfather. So they decide that after Yeochun Sam's death, Sunju will become Hyundong's legal guardian. Later that day, Sunju tells Hyewon-mak and Deokjun that their paths crossed in their past lives. One day, when Deokjun came down from the mountains to find food for the children, she was attacked by a tiger. But back then, Hyewon-mak was even more formidable. He comes to rescue and kills the tiger. After identifying her as a Jurchen girl, he demands she leads him and his men to hide out, and after breaking in, they discover all the kids. Hyewon's right-hand man reminds him that they're Jurchen kids, so they should root them all out. Hyewon says he'll do it himself, takes a knife, and walks into the cabin while Deokjun stares helplessly. Well, I guess back then root them out meant cook them a nice warm meal, because that's what they did. On TV, Hyewon sees that Soo-hong's body was discovered, and the two responsible for his death were arrested. Along the journey, Gangrim and Soo-hong argue over his death. Soo-hong believes that his death was a genuine mistake on his two friends' parts, that they really believed he was dead when they were burying him. If they knew he was still alive, they would have stopped and helped him. He says they were like brothers to him, and there's no way they'd betray him. But Gangrim interrupts him, saying that he was once betrayed by his own brother in his past life. It appears that even though Gangrim became a guardian at the same time as Deokjun and Hyewon-mak, he still retains all of his memories. 1,000 years ago, Gangrim's father, General Gaemunjik, was the commander-in-chief of the Goryeo army against the Khitans. When Gangrim was a teenager, his father made him tag along on the battlefield so he could learn and follow in his footsteps to become a great general as well. Whenever the Khitans would surrender after a devastating loss, Gaemunjik would let them go. Gangrim was against this, believing they were barbarians who deserved no mercy. Yet his father always preferred mercy over killing. One day, while making their way back through a war-torn Khitan village, they saw a young boy, the lone survivor of his village, consoling an injured horse and showing mercy. He stabs and kills the horse to end its suffering. Gaemunjik admires this trait and decides to adopt the boy. The boy eventually surpasses Gangrim in everything, from board games to sword combat, and Gangrim watches as they grow closer. Whenever Gangrim isn't around, his father calls the boy son, and the boy calls him dad. Gangrim feels mad, thinking, damn, now I gotta stab horses to get some love around here. One day, a couple of decades later, before a final battle with one of the Khitan fronts, Gangrim eavesdrops on a conversation between his father and brother. His father wants his brother to lead the vanguard against the Khitans, believing they are on the back foot, although it was meant to be Gangrim's honor. His father says that Gangrim's inability to show mercy will result in many unnecessary casualties. Well, he was wrong. Without Gangrim's aggressive strategy, much of the front line is killed off, including his father, forcing them to retreat. After that, Gangrim becomes commander-in-chief of the Goryeo army and never forgives his brother, believing him to be the reason his father died. That night, Deokjun and Hyewon-mak ask Sunju more about their past lives. Sunju tells them that they had become close friends, but one day, Hyewon asks about her parents. She explains that they were simple farmers who were killed when the Goryeo army attacked their village. She says they were killed by the general known as White Wildcat, who wore a white fur scarf that covered the lower part of his face. Oops, my bad, Hyewon thinks silently. Gangrim and Soo-hong arrive at the first trial, the Hell of Injustice, where souls are punished in ice for hundreds of years. They present themselves before King Ergo. The prosecutors argue that after becoming a vengeful spirit, Soo-hong had wreaked havoc on both the living world and the underworld. For this reason, they claim he is a grave sinner and should be confined in ice for 500 years. When Gangrim states that Soo-hong's killers knew they were burying him alive, King Ergo asks to see proof. However, all of Soo-hong's records were discarded as protocol when he turned into a vengeful spirit. So Gangrim summons a witness from the living world, Dong-young, the man who shot Soo-hong. Dong-young is in the hospital, having attempted to end his life out of guilt for what he did, summoning him during his sleep, believing it to be a dream. He initially answers all their questions. But when Gangrim presses him about whether he saw that Soo-hong was still alive when he buried him, Dong-young becomes extremely distressed, suffers a heart attack, and dies. Now, the charge of murder has also been added to Soo-hong's records, necessitating a trial in the Hell of Murder. King Ergo allows them to pass to the next trial, as it is still unknown whether Soo-hong was killed knowingly. The next trial may reveal the answer. The next day, when Sunju and the two guardians are preparing to go to court so that Sunju can become Hyundong's legal guardian, Deokjun and Hyewon-mak begin arguing. She is sickened by him for killing her innocent parents and says she has never forgiven him, nor will she ever. Oh, but she did, says Sunju. After finding out what he did to her parents, Hyewon wanted to tell her and ask for forgiveness, but never had the courage to do so. Instead, knowing he wouldn't be able to care for her and the children as he belonged on the battlefield, He taught them everything he knew about survival. Whenever he reported to his superior, General Mirayan, he would lie about the food supply he and his men needed so he could give more to Deokjun and the kids. After Sanju successfully becomes Hyundong's legal guardian, they make their way back home only to find that the loan sharks from earlier had returned while they were out, destroy the entire place, and attack Jochin Sam. Immediately, Sanju falls to the ground. Earlier, while vandalizing the home, the loan sharks had broken Sanju's jar, and now he's dying. As he grows weaker, he continues to tell their story. One day, Mirayan grew suspicious, so he tortured one of Hyewon's men until he told him the truth. He tied Hyewon and his friend to a tree and left them for the wolves, while setting out to find the kids' hideout and kill them. But you see, back then, Hyewon was an even better mofo. After killing the wolves, he drags his friend's body by himself all the way up to the mountains and warns Deokjun before Mirayan and his men can get to them. As Mirayan approaches, Hyewon tells Deokjun to leave with the kids while he buys them time. Before she walks away, he takes out the white fur scarf and ties it around her to keep her warm. He then tells her he is sorry. She begins to cry, but in her pain, she still hugs and forgives him. As she leaves, Hyewon turns to Mirayan and his men and draws his sword for the final time. At the next trial in the Hell of Violence, Karim asks King Jingwain to defer the trial so that all charges may be handled in the final trial. Karim puts his guardianship and his own reincarnation on the line to make King Yomra present at the final trial, a request granted. As they make their way to the Hell of Murder, Suhong questions the lengths Karim is willing to go to. He figures out that Karim isn't just doing all this for him, but also for himself. So he asks Karim what memories from his past life are so bad that he wants to wipe them out for good and be reincarnated. As Sanju nears his last breath, he tells the two guardians that nobody is inherently good or bad. It is bad circumstances that create bad intentions and then bad people, and vice versa. He then says that they should always take a moment and read things backward. Then they will all make sense. Sanju then disintegrates, leaving Hyewon slowly grasping the cryptic message left in Sanju's final words. He writes down Million's name on a piece of paper and turns it around, revealing that backward it spells Karim in Korean. Then we see the final showdown. Karim draws his sword on the helpless Hyewon, who apparently was his adoptive brother. Hyewon begs him to spare the kids, but Karim kills him, only for him to be killed himself by Deokjun, who is then killed by him. As all three of them lie there, King Yomra approaches Karim and asks why he is crying. Is it because he got wasted by a girl, or because he's sorry for what he did? As all three of them lie there, King Yomra approaches Karim and asks why he is crying. Is it because he got wasted by a girl, or because he's sorry for what he did? As Karim and Suhong appear in the final court before King Byeong-song, Hyewon and Deokjun hide out and observe the trial. Karim summons one more witness, Park Museum, the other man responsible for Suhong's death. Park slips into a trance while in the prison courtyard, and his consciousness appears in the court. Karim asks him whether he knew that Suhong was still alive when he buried him, but Park is afraid to reply. Karim then asks King Yomra why his father, Kam Moon-jaek's death, was recorded as a murder and not an honorable death on the battlefield. King Yomra replies that it's because he was murdered by Karim himself. After Karim confirms this, King Yomra then asks him why he did it. As it turns out, Karim sort of technically may have kind of murdered his father that day. After the battle, Karim and his men went to the front lines to find survivors. Karim spotted his father buried under the rest of his men but still alive. Karim then chose to abandon his father and instructed his men to retreat. He was afraid that his father would make Hyewon commander-in-chief if he survived. But later that night, he was overcome with guilt, so he went back to the battlefield, but it was too late. This is what motivated him to help Suhong, as his death reminded him of his father's, and he regretted what he did every single day for the past 1,000 years. He regretted not being able to apologize to his father that day when he died. King Yomra offered him a deal as redemption, but also to make it up to the innocent people he had just murdered. He would make Karim and the two other guardians, but he would wipe their memories, leaving Karim's intact as punishment. If Karim could successfully pass 49 souls through the 7 trials during the next 1,000 years, King Yomra would reincarnate Hyewon and Deokjun. He would also reincarnate Karim and wipe all of his memories. Karim took the deal, having regretted what he did and wanting to forget it all. He wanted Hyewon and Deokjun to get a second chance at life, and he wanted one without the burden of guilt for his sins. After hearing about Karim's immense regret for what he did to his father, Park gains the courage to confess that he and Donghyun did, in fact, know that Suhong was still alive when they buried him. But since he was struggling to make ends meet with a baby on the way and a promotion around the corner, he convinced himself it was too late anyway. He then apologizes to Suhong and is forgiven before he leaves and returns to jail. This also means Donghyun died from the shock of guilt rather than murder. King Byeong-song then clears Suhong of his charges and transports him in line for reincarnation. Suhong was Karim's 49th soul. Then they go to collect Jochin Sam's soul, but they decide to defer his ascension until Hyundong graduates school. Until then, they will remain guardians instead of reincarnating. Then Kamrim takes the other two guardians to guide the next soul, who happens to be Dongyan. Before they begin the trials, he attempts to come clean to Deokjun and Hee-won about what he did to them, believing they don't know. But they have already forgiven him and tell him that it's a 1,000-year-old story anyway. The end.